The buzzing of my phone interrupted the harsh December silence of my car. 23rd missed call from Madison in the last hour. I watched the screen light up again with her name, illuminating the darkness where I'd been sitting for the past 3 hours, just staring at the falling snow outside an empty gas station. It was Christmas night, and my entire world had just collapsed like a house of cards. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the laughter I heard afterward, Madison's light, carefree giggle mixing with my cousin Derek's deep chuckle as if what they had done was nothing more than a harmless prank. That sound would haunt me forever, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind to how it all began, 12 hours earlier, when I was still excited about introducing Madison to my entire family at our traditional Christmas dinner. "Are you nervous?" I asked Madison as we pulled up to my parents' sprawling suburban home, already surrounded by at least 10 other cars belonging to various family members. Madison adjusted her red cocktail dress and fluffed her blonde hair in the visor mirror. "Why would I be nervous? I'm great with parents. They always love me." She flashed that confident smile that had captivated me 18 months ago at the coffee shop where we first met. I should have seen the signs back then. The way she charmed the barista into giving her free refills, how she managed to get the last table by subtly cutting in front of an elderly couple. Madison had a way of getting what she wanted, and for the past year and a half, I'd been what she wanted, or so I thought. "Just remember, my family can be a bit intense," I warned, thinking specifically of my overbearing mother and judgmental aunts. "And my cousin Derek might be there. He can be a bit of a jerk, especially when he drinks." Madison rolled her eyes. "Babe, relax. It's Christmas dinner, not a Pentagon briefing. I've handled tough crowds before." I nodded, trying to shake off my unease. Madison was right. She was amazingly socially adept, always the life of any party. In fact, she often overshadowed me at social gatherings, which was fine since I'd always been the quieter type. I was a software developer who preferred quiet nights in, while Madison was a PR specialist who thrived in social situations. We'd been living together for 8 months now, and while things weren't perfect, we occasionally argued about her excessive spending and my long work hours. I believed we were solid. I'd even started looking at engagement rings, thinking about proposing on New Year's Eve. As we walked up the driveway carrying bags of presents and a homemade pie, store-bought but transferred to our dish, I kissed Madison's cheek. "Thanks for doing this. Family stuff isn't everyone's idea of a good time." She squeezed my hand. "Don't worry, I'm excited to finally meet everyone you've told me about." The moment we walked through the door, the chaos enveloped us. My mother rushed forward, already half tipsy from her traditional Christmas mimosas, pulling Madison into an awkward hug while my father stood back, offering a reserved handshake. My younger sister Amy immediately bombarded Madison with questions about her job, her dress, her shoes. I watched nervously as Madison seamlessly navigated it all, complimenting my mother's Christmas decorations, engaging my father in a surprisingly informed conversation about golf, and fielding Amy's rapid-fire questions with grace and humor. "She's definitely a keeper," whispered my Aunt Helen as she passed by, patting my shoulder approvingly. By the time we made it to the living room where the rest of the extended family had gathered, Madison was already being treated like a long-lost relative rather than a newcomer. She fit in everywhere, laughing with my teenage cousins about some TikTok trend I was clueless about, discussing recipes with my grandmother, and even engaging in light political banter with my Uncle Steve without stepping on any toes. I was getting drinks in the kitchen when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "So this is the famous Madison, huh? Nice pull, cuz, way out of your league." I turned to find Derek leaning against the doorframe, beer in hand, his eyes fixed on Madison across the room. At 32, 2 years older than me, Derek had always been the family's golden boy, former high school quarterback, now a successful real estate agent with the kind of confident charm that made everyone gravitate toward him. We'd grown up together, but there had always been an unspoken competition between us, one that I inevitably lost. "Don't start, Derek," I muttered, dropping ice cubes into glasses with more force than necessary. He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just paying a compliment. Seriously though, she's hot, and seems cool too." I forced a smile. "Yeah, she's amazing. We're talking about moving into a bigger place next year." Derek's eyes never left Madison as he nodded absently. "Cool, cool. Hey, you should bring her to my New Year's party." "Not like your boring office one, an actual fun party." Before I could respond, he had pushed off from the doorframe and was making his way across the room toward Madison, who was now alone, examining the family photos on the mantelpiece. I watched as he introduced himself, saw Madison's face light up with that smile, noticed how she laughed at whatever he said within the first 30 seconds of their meeting. Something twisted in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I was being paranoid. Madison was just being her usual social self. Dinner was served an hour later, with 23 of us crowded around my parents' extended dining table and the kids' table set up nearby. Somehow, in the shuffle of seating arrangements, Madison ended up seated across from Derek rather than next to me. I was stuck between my Aunt Helen and my 7-year-old niece Lily, with Madison 4 seats away. The dinner progressed as it typically did, loud conversations overlapping, wine flowing freely, my father carving the turkey with ceremonial precision. My mother kept shooting approving glances at Madison, who was handling herself beautifully, engaging with everyone around her. From my position, I could see her charming my entire family, but I couldn't hear what she was saying over the din. It was during dessert that I noticed something odd. Madison's animated chatter had quieted and she seemed distracted. I saw her check her phone under the table several times. Derek, seated across from her, was unusually focused on his pie, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. When Madison excused herself to use the restroom, I thought nothing of it. When Derek followed suit about 2 minutes later, claiming he needed to take a call from work, a small alarm bell rang in the back of my mind. But I dismissed it. It was Christmas dinner with my family, for God's sake. Even Madison wouldn't be that brazen, and despite our differences, Derek wouldn't cross that line. Would he? They both returned within an acceptable time frame from different directions, and I felt foolish for my suspicions. Madison's lipstick was intact, her hair perfectly in place. Derek resumed his seat, immediately engaging my uncle in conversation about property values. After dessert, as everyone moved to the living room for the gift exchange, I finally managed to get Madison alone for a moment in the hallway. "Having fun?" I asked, wrapping my arms around her waist. She nodded but seemed distracted. "Your family is great, really great. You've been amazing, they all love you." I kissed her forehead. "Even my mom, which is saying something." Madison smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her phone buzzed in her purse and she tensed slightly. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just work stuff," she said quickly. "You know how it is, even on Christmas." I did know. Madison's PR firm handled several high-profile clients who apparently had no respect for holidays. It wasn't unusual for her to be fielding calls or emails at odd hours. She checked her phone quickly, her fingers moving to dismiss whatever notification had come through before I could see it. It was a small movement, one I might not have noticed if I hadn't been watching her so closely. "Is it that Williams account again?" I asked, referring to a particularly demanding client she'd been complaining about for weeks. "Something like that," she mumbled, sliding the phone back into her purse. "Let's just enjoy the rest of the evening, okay? I don't want work to ruin Christmas." I nodded, trying to ignore the slight discomfort I felt. Madison had always been transparent about her work, often venting to me about difficult clients or sharing funny stories about her colleagues. This sudden secretiveness felt out of character, but I chalked it up to holiday stress and the pressure of meeting my entire family at once. As we rejoined the others in the living room, I noticed Derek sitting alone in the corner, also engrossed in his phone. He looked up as we entered, his eyes meeting Madison's for just a fraction of a second before they both glanced away. Again, it was such a quick, subtle interaction that I nearly missed it. But something in that brief exchange, a flicker of recognition of shared secrecy, sent a chill down my spine. I pushed the feeling aside. I was being paranoid, seeing things that weren't there. After all, they'd only just met a few hours ago. What possible connection could they have developed in such a short time? "Well, try to ignore it if you can. The gift exchange is the fun part," I said, leading her toward the living room. The next hour was a blur of wrapping paper, exclamations over gifts, and the usual family drama over who got what. My niece Lily was recording everything on the new iPad she'd received for Christmas, wandering around the room capturing reactions for what she called her Christmas documentary for a school project. As the evening wound down, people began to disperse throughout the house, some helping with cleanup, others settling into food comas in front of the TV, a few stepping outside for fresh air. I lost track of Madison as I helped my father bring empty dishes to the kitchen. It was when I went looking for her that things started to unravel. I checked the living room, the front porch, even asked my mother if she'd seen her. No one had. Finally, I decided to check the dining room, thinking she might have gone back for another piece of pie. She had mentioned how much she loved my grandmother's recipe. The dining room was dimly lit now, most of the candles burned down, the remnants of our feast still scattered across the table. At first glance, the room appeared empty. But then I heard it, a stifled giggle coming from under the table followed by a low male chuckle. I froze, my mind refusing to process what my instincts were already screaming at me. Slowly, I moved forward, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. Another giggle. "We shouldn't," Madison's voice, breathy and playful. "No one will notice," came Derek's reply, followed by a sound I recognized all too well, the particular sigh Madison made when she was being kissed just below her ear. I stood there, paralyzed, as the sounds continued. The rustle of clothing, more hushed laughter, whispered instructions. I couldn't see them, hidden as they were beneath the long tablecloth, but I could picture it all too clearly. I should have flipped the table over. I should have yanked the tablecloth away and exposed them. I should have shouted and made a scene. Instead, I just stood there, my whole body cold, listening to my girlfriend and my cousin engage in what was unmistakably a sexual encounter, right there under my family's Christmas dinner table. It was at that moment that Lily walked in, iPad in hand, still recording for her documentary. "Uncle Jason, where's everybody? I need more people for my movie," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. From under the table, the sounds abruptly stopped. "Lily," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady, "why don't you go find Grandma?" "I think she was looking for you." Lily, oblivious to the tension, nodded and turned to go, her iPad still recording, pointed loosely in the direction of the table. "Okay, are people hiding under there?" she asked innocently, noticing the slight movement of the tablecloth. "No one important," I said, loud enough to be heard clearly under the table. "Just people who don't matter anymore." Lily looked confused but thankfully left the room. As soon as she was gone, I walked to the edge of the table and knelt down, lifting the tablecloth just enough to see them. The image is seared into my memory: Madison, her red dress pushed up around her waist, hastily trying to adjust her underwear, and Derek, his pants unbuttoned, a deer-in-headlights expression replacing his usual smug grin. "Jason," Madison began, her face flushed, lipstick smeared. I let the tablecloth drop. Without a word, I stood up and walked out of the room, out of the house, and into the cold December night. Behind me, I heard the scraping of chairs as they presumably scrambled out from their hiding place. I made it to my car before either of them caught up with me. As I fumbled for my keys, Madison came running down the driveway, Derek a few paces behind. "Jason, wait, it's not what you think," she called out, the most cliched line in the history of being caught cheating. I turned to face her, suddenly calm in a way that surprised even me. "Not what I think. Were you not just having sex with my cousin under my parents' dinner table during Christmas dinner?" Madison's expression shifted from panic to a strange defensiveness. "We weren't having sex. It was just fooling around. It didn't mean anything." Derek hung back, hands in his pockets, having the decency to at least look uncomfortable. "Didn't mean anything," I repeated, the words hollow in my mouth. "Just like our relationship doesn't mean anything, apparently." "That's not fair," Madison protested. "It was a mistake, a stupid one-time mistake." Derek finally spoke up. "Man, I'm sorry, we had too much to drink and save it," I cut him off. "Both of you just save it." I got into my car, my hands shaking as I put the key in the ignition. Madison stepped forward, placing her hand on my window. "Don't leave like this. Come back inside. We can talk about it," she pleaded. And that's when I heard it, that laugh again. Derek had muttered something to her that I couldn't hear, and she responded with that same light, carefree giggle I'd heard under the table, as if this whole situation was somehow amusing, as if my pain was a joke. I started the car, backed out of the driveway, and drove away, Madison's voice calling after me. That was 3 hours ago. I'd been sitting in this gas station parking lot ever since, watching my phone light up with calls and messages from Madison. 23 missed calls. 17 text messages ranging from apologetic, "I'm so sorry, please let me explain," to angry, "You're overreacting." It was nothing, to desperate, "Please tell me where you are, I'm worried." Not a single message from Derek, of course. He probably went back to the party, helped himself to another piece of pie. As I sat there contemplating what to do next, my phone buzzed with a new notification. Not a call or text this time, but an email from my niece Lily's iPad account, automatically sharing the Christmas documentary footage with family members. With a sense of dread mixed with morbid curiosity, I opened it. Most of the video was typical family Christmas stuff, people opening presents, my father carving the turkey, my mother directing traffic in the kitchen. But near the end, there it was. Lily walking into the dining room, finding me standing there in shock. The camera, pointed carelessly toward the table, captured a clear view underneath when she asked if people were hiding there. The footage was brief but unmistakable: Madison and Derek, partially clothed, frantically trying to adjust themselves. The audio picked up their panicked whispers, Madison's "oh shit," Derek's nervous laugh. Then my voice, calm and devastated. No one important, just people who don't matter anymore. I closed the video, wondering how many family members had already seen it. Wondering if my parents were watching it right now, if they were embarrassed, angry, or merely disappointed. Wondering if Derek had the audacity to still be there, making excuses, or if he'd slunk away when the evidence of his betrayal was literally broadcast to the entire family. My phone buzzed again, Madison calling for the 24th time. This time I answered. "What? Jason, please come home," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, I don't know what I was thinking, it meant nothing." "Did you watch Lily's video?" I asked flatly. A pause. "What video?" "Check your email." Lily shared her Christmas documentary with everyone. You and Derek have starring roles. Her sharp intake of breath told me everything. Oh God. Yeah, I said. Oh God is right. Jason, I'll be home tomorrow to pack my things, I interrupted. I'll crash at Mike's place until I find somewhere else to live. No, she cried, don't do this. It was one stupid mistake. We can work through this. There was desperation in her voice that I'd never heard before. In our 18 months together, I'd seen Madison confident, irritated, happy, occasionally sad, but never desperate. Never pleading. She'd always been the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of our relationship in subtle ways I was only now beginning to recognize. Madison, I said, her name feeling strange on my tongue like it belonged to someone I no longer knew, do you understand what happened tonight? Do you get how humiliating this was? Not just finding you with Derek, but the fact that my entire family now knows, that my niece accidentally recorded it for a school project. I know, and I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't cover this, I cut her off. This wasn't some impulsive thing. I saw your messages with Derek. This has been going on for weeks. Her breathing hitched. You saw the messages? Yes, all of them, including the ones from 2 days ago where you told him how excited you were to finally meet him in person at Christmas dinner, how you'd make it worth his while. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Then, in a much smaller voice, it wasn't what you think. What exactly wasn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were planning this, like meeting my family was just a convenient opportunity to hook up with my cousin. No, that's not true, she protested. Meeting your family was important to me. You are important to me, Derek. That was just, I don't know, a stupid flirtation that got out of hand. Under my parents' dinner table during Christmas dinner. She had no response to that. The worst part, I continued, feeling a strange calm settle over me, is that I was going to propose on New Year's Eve. I already bought the ring. I laughed then, a sound so foreign to my own ears that it startled me. Work through this. Madison, you were having sex with my cousin under my family's Christmas dinner table, while my 7-year-old niece was recording a video for school. Exactly what part of that do you think we can work through? It wasn't sex, she insisted weakly. We were just, I don't care what you call it, I cut her off. It's over, we're over. Please, she whispered, I love you. The sad thing was I believed her. In her own way, maybe she did love me, but not enough, never enough. Was it worth it? I asked suddenly, the question that had been burning in my mind since I saw them. Was it worth throwing away everything we had? For what? A few minutes of excitement under a table? Her silence spoke volumes. That's what I thought, I said quietly. You didn't even consider what you were risking. What that says to me is that you didn't value what we had in the first place. That's not true, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I made a mistake. People make mistakes, Jason. You're acting like you've never done anything wrong. There's a difference between making a mistake and making a choice, I replied. You chose this, multiple times. The flirting with Derek, the planning, the whatever happened under that table, those weren't mistakes, they were decisions. I heard her beginning to cry again, but it didn't move me the way it once would have. I wondered if her tears had always been this calculated, this perfectly timed to disarm me when logic was on my side. I was going to spend my life with you, I said softly. I thought you were the one, now I don't even know who you are. I am the one, she insisted through tears. This doesn't change everything we've been through together. I know I messed up badly, but we can fix this. We can go to therapy. I can prove to you that you can trust me again." For a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine that future, the painful couples therapy sessions, the constant checking of her phone, the nagging doubt every time she worked late or mentioned a male colleague. The knowledge that every family gathering would be tainted by what happened, that holiday dinners would forever carry the shadow of this betrayal, it would be a half-life filled with suspicion and resentment. "No," I said finally, "we can't fix this. Some things once broken stay that way. Please," she whispered, "I love you." "Goodbye, Madison," I said and hung up. I sat there for another hour as my phone continued to buzz with calls and messages. Not just from Madison now, but from my parents, my sister, even a tentative text from my mother asking if I was okay. I answered only my sister's call, briefly telling her I was fine and would talk tomorrow. I couldn't face any of them tonight. Eventually, I started the car again and drove to my friend Mike's apartment. He answered the door in his pajamas, took one look at my face, and stepped aside without a word. That's what 20 years of friendship gets you, understanding without explanation. "Couch is yours," he said, tossing me a blanket. "Beer's in the fridge, talk or don't talk, up to you." I nodded gratefully, sinking onto his couch. "Got Lily's video?" "Yeah," he grimaced. "Whole family's blowing up about it." "Your mom called me looking for you. Derek's still there when the video went out," Mike snorted. "No, man, he bolted before anyone even saw it. Your dad called him, though. I could hear the shouting from the other end." I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. "Madison's called 24 times. You going back? Just to get my stuff?" Mike nodded, then went to get me a beer. When he returned, he asked the question I'd been avoiding all night. "What are you going to do now?" I took a long pull from the bottle. "Start over, I guess. New year, new life. You know you can stay here as long as you need." "Thanks," I said, feeling the first hint of warmth since discovering the betrayal. At least I had one person I could still count on. As Mike headed back to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts, my phone buzzed one more time. A text from Madison. "Please come home. I made a terrible mistake. I'll do anything to fix this." I turned off my phone without responding and lay back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The image of them under the table kept playing in my mind, along with the sound of Madison's laughter afterward. That careless, casual laugh that told me everything I needed to know about how much our relationship really meant to her. Tomorrow, I would go back to what had been our apartment. I would pack my things while she cried and apologized and promised it would never happen again. I would not yell or scream or break things, though part of me wanted to. I would simply leave, start looking for my own place, and begin the process of untangling our shared life. It would be painful, it would be tedious, but it would be necessary. As for Derek, my family would handle him. The look on my father's face when he eventually saw that video would be punishment enough. Derek might be the golden boy, but even he couldn't talk his way out of this one. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering everything in a clean white blanket. I thought about how appropriate that was, nature wiping the slate clean, covering the mess underneath. New year, new life. It wasn't what I had planned, but it was what I had now. When I finally fell asleep on Mike's lumpy couch, I dreamt not of Madison or Derek or the humiliation of it all, but of that snow, silent, relentless, forgiving in its cold embrace. Covering everything, making it new again. Tomorrow would be another day. And for the first time since I'd met Madison 18 months ago, I'd be facing it alone. But maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what I needed. 3 days later, I stood in what used to be our apartment, surrounded by boxes of my belongings. Madison had gone to work, unable to get any more time off after the Christmas break, which made this easier. No tears, no pleas, no explanations I didn't want to hear. I'd been methodical about it. Clothes in these boxes, books in those, electronics carefully wrapped and packed. My life reduced to cardboard containers, ready to be loaded into the U-Haul parked outside. Mike and another friend, Carlos, were helping me move. They worked quietly, respecting my silence, occasionally asking practical questions about where certain items belonged. As I was doing a final sweep of the bedroom, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Dinner at our house tonight. Just family, we need to talk." I hadn't spoken to my parents since Christmas night, though I'd exchanged a few brief texts assuring them I was physically okay. I knew this conversation was inevitable, but I'd been dreading it nonetheless. My gaze fell on the nightstand drawer, the one where I'd hidden the engagement ring. I opened it, half expecting the small velvet box to be gone, but there it was, exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my palm. Inside was the vintage emerald-cut diamond I'd spent months saving for, chosen because Madison had once pointed to a similar one in a magazine and said it was her dream ring. I pocketed the box. I'd return it to the jeweler tomorrow. Maybe they'd give me a partial refund, though the monetary loss seemed trivial compared to everything else I'd lost. On Madison's side of the closet, a few of her dresses still hung, the ones she rarely wore, probably wouldn't miss until weeks from now. I left them there. I didn't want any reason to contact her again once I walked out that door. On the dresser sat framed photos of us, at the beach last summer, hiking in Colorado at her company's Christmas party. I'd already packed the ones I wanted to keep, though I wasn't sure why I was keeping any. Maybe someday I'd look at them and feel something other than this hollow ache in my chest. "Got everything?" Mike asked from the doorway. I nodded, taking one last look around the room where Madison and I had spent countless nights, planning a future that would never happen now. "Yeah, I'm done here." As we carried the last boxes down to the truck, I noticed Madison's car pulling into the parking lot. She wasn't supposed to be home for hours. I froze, boxes in hand, as she spotted me and parked haphazardly across 2 spaces. "Just keep loading," I told Mike and Carlos. "I'll handle this." Madison rushed toward me, her face tear-stained, hair uncombed, a stark contrast to her usual put-together appearance. "You're really doing this," she said, her voice hollow. "Yes," I replied simply, continuing toward the truck with my boxes. She followed me. "I've been calling and texting for days. You can't just throw away a year and a half without even talking to me." I placed the boxes in the truck before turning to face her. "What's there to talk about, Madison? I saw what happened. The whole family saw what happened, thanks to Lily's video." Madison winced. "That video doesn't show everything. It was a stupid, drunk mistake." "Were you drunk when you decided to follow Derek under the table? Were you drunk when you texted him afterward?" "Because yeah, I saw those too." The night after Christmas, unable to sleep at Mike's, I'd finally looked at Madison's other text messages. Derek's name had been all over her recent conversations. She paled. "You went through my phone." "No, your messages synced to the iPad at home, remember? The one you insisted we needed to share." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Not very tech-savvy for a PR professional." Madison's expression shifted from shock to anger. "So you spied on me? After finding you under a table with my cousin?" "Yeah, I checked to see if it was a pattern. Turns out it was." The messages dated back 3 weeks, starting the day after Madison had met Derek at a chance encounter at the mall where I'd introduced them briefly. "It wasn't serious," she insisted. "We were just flirting. Christmas was the first time anything physical happened." "And that makes it better." I shook my head. "The fact that you chose to have your first physical encounter with him under my family's dinner table, surrounded by my relatives, including children?" She had no answer for that. Mike approached cautiously. "Truck's loaded, man, whenever you're ready." I nodded to him, then turned back to Madison. "I need to go." "Where will you stay?" she asked, suddenly looking small and lost. "Not your concern anymore." "Can I call you just to talk?" I studied her face, the face I'd woken up to every morning for months, the face I'd thought I might look at for the rest of my life. Now all I saw was the image of her under that table, laughing with Derek. "No," I said finally, "I don't think that would be good for either of us." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "I really am sorry, Jason. I never meant to hurt you." I just looked at her. "Then you should have thought about that before you crawled under a table with my cousin." I turned and walked away, joining Mike and Carlos in the truck. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the side mirror. Madison stood where I'd left her, watching us drive away, one hand raised in a half-hearted wave. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a strange emptiness where all those emotions had been raging for the past few days. It was almost peaceful. "You okay?" Mike asked as we merged onto the highway. "Yeah," I said, surprised to find it wasn't entirely a lie. "I will be." My parents' house looked different somehow as I pulled into the driveway that evening. The Christmas decorations were still up, but the place seemed dimmer, as if the holiday cheer had been sucked out of it. My mother opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a tight hug without a word. Over her shoulder, I could see my father in the living room, standing awkwardly, uncertainty written across his face. Come in," Mom said, finally releasing me. "Dinner's almost ready." The house was eerily quiet compared to the chaos of Christmas. No extended family tonight, just my parents, my sister Amy, and me. "Where's Lily?" I asked as we moved into the dining room, a different one than I'd grown up with, thankfully. "My parents had renovated last year. At a sleepover," Amy answered. She doesn't understand what she recorded. We told her the iPad had a glitch and the video was corrupted." I nodded gratefully. Good, she doesn't need to know. Dinner was a subdued affair, everyone carefully avoiding the elephant in the room until my father finally cleared his throat halfway through the meal. I spoke to Derek, he said, his voice gruff. I kept my eyes on my plate. And he's not welcome at family gatherings anymore, not for the foreseeable future. Dad's tone made it clear this wasn't open for discussion. What he did, it was unforgivable. I looked up, surprised by the vehemence in my usually reserved father's voice. Your Aunt Linda is beside herself, Mom added, referring to Derek's mother. She came over yesterday to apologize in person. None of this is your fault, Amy said firmly, or Aunt Linda's. I know, I replied, pushing food around on my plate without eating much. It's just embarrassing, humiliating. You have nothing to be embarrassed about, Dad insisted. Nothing. We fell silent again, the only sound the gentle clink of silverware against plates. How are you really doing? Mom finally asked, her voice soft. I considered lying, saying I was fine, but the concern in her eyes broke something inside me. I don't know, I admitted. It's like I can't believe it happened, but also can't believe I didn't see it coming. What do you mean? Amy asked. I shrugged. Madison always needed to be the center of attention, always needed validation from everyone around her. I just never thought she'd go that far for it. She called me, Mom said, and I looked up sharply. Yesterday. Crying, apologizing, asking if I knew where you were staying. What did you tell her? That it wasn't my place to get involved, but that she should respect your space. Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I didn't tell her anything. Thanks, I said, relief washing over me. The last thing I needed was Madison showing up at Mike's. What's your plan now? Dad asked, ever practical. I'm staying with Mike until I find a place. I already called the leasing office at Parkview Apartments. They have a unit opening up next month. Dad nodded approvingly. Good, and work. I took this week off, but I'll be back on Monday. The thought of returning to my coding job with its predictable problems and solutions was actually comforting. I'll be okay. Of course you will, Mom said fiercely. You're stronger than you think. The rest of dinner passed with lighter conversation, Amy's promotion, Dad's golf game, Mom's book club drama, normal family stuff, deliberately avoiding any mention of Christmas night or the aftermath. As I was leaving, Mom pressed a container of leftovers into my hands and hugged me again. We love you, she whispered. Whatever you need, we're here. I hugged her back, suddenly grateful for the family I did have, the ones who stood by me, who kicked Derek out of future gatherings without hesitation, who opened their home to me even after the disaster that was Christmas dinner. I know, I said. Love you too. 1 month later, I was settling into my new apartment, a small one-bedroom in a building across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No memories of Madison here, no echoes of a relationship that had imploded so spectacularly. I'd thrown myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied during the day and exhausting myself enough to sleep at night. My boss had been surprisingly understanding when I'd vaguely explained I was going through a bad breakup and needed the distraction. Madison had finally stopped calling and texting after the first 2 weeks, apparently accepting that I meant what I said about it being over. The last message I received from her was simple. I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday you can forgive me. I'll always love you. I hadn't responded. Derek had tried to contact me exactly once, a long, rambling email full of excuses and self-pity that I'd deleted halfway through. My sister told me he'd moved to Florida for a fresh start, though the family gossip suggested his real estate business had taken a hit after word of his behavior spread through their social circle. I was just beginning to feel like myself again when the invitation arrived in my email. New Year's Eve party at the loft hosted by Carlos and Stephanie. Carlos, who'd helped me move, and his girlfriend were throwing a big party at their downtown apartment. My first instinct was to decline. The thought of socializing, of putting on a happy face while everyone tiptoed around my recent breakup, was exhausting. But then I remembered Madison's last message. I hope someday you can forgive me, and something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, I wasn't there yet, might never be, but a determination not to let what she'd done define my life moving forward. I RSVP'd yes. The party was in full swing when I arrived, the spacious loft apartment filled with people I mostly knew through Carlos, his coworkers, friends from his rugby team, a few familiar faces from previous gatherings. Music pulsed through the space, not too loud to prevent conversation but energetic enough to create a festive atmosphere. Carlos spotted me and made his way over, beer in hand. You came, wasn't sure you would. I shrugged, accepting the beer he offered. New year, new start, right? He grinned. That's the spirit. Come on, let me introduce you to some people. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and small talk. I found myself actually enjoying the conversations, the simple normalcy of discussing movies and sports and complaining about work. No one mentioned Madison or asked about my love life, likely warned in advance by Carlos. It was nearing midnight when I stepped out onto the balcony for some air, the apartment having grown increasingly warm with the press of bodies. The night was cold but clear, the city lights spread out below like a constellation of earthbound stars. Too crowded in there for you two. I turned to find a woman leaning against the railing a few feet away, her breath visible in the cold air. She was wrapped in an oversized sweater despite the party attire most guests were sporting inside. Just needed a breather, I replied. She nodded. Me too, I'm Emma, by the way, friend of Stephanie's from college. Jason, friend of Carlos's from life, I guess. We grew up together. Emma smiled, and something about it struck me, how genuine it seemed, how it reached her eyes in a way I realized Madison's rarely had. Those are the best kinds of friends, she said. The ones who have seen all your phases and still stick around. Yeah, I agreed, thinking of how Mike had taken me in without question, how Carlos had spent his weekend helping me move. They are. Inside, people began counting down. 10, 9, 8, Emma glanced at me. Should we go back in for the countdown? I considered the crowded living room, the couples who would be kissing at midnight, the forced joviality of it all. Actually, I think I'm good right here, but you should go if you want. 7, 6, 5, she shook her head. I'm good here too, a pause, unless you'd rather be alone. 4, 3. No, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Company's nice. 2, 1, Happy New Year. Cheers erupted from inside, noisemakers and glasses clinking. Out on the balcony, Emma and I simply smiled at each other. Happy New Year, Jason, she said quietly. Happy New Year, Emma. We didn't kiss. We didn't even touch. We just stood there in comfortable silence, watching fireworks bloom across the distant skyline, marking the beginning of something new. And in that moment, beneath the explosion of fireworks marking a new beginning, I realized something important. The pain hadn't disappeared, not entirely. But standing there with a stranger who asked nothing of me, who seemed content just sharing the silence, I felt a glimmer of possibility I hadn't experienced since Christmas night. The next day, I woke up in my new apartment without the crushing weight of betrayal that had greeted me every morning for the past week. It was still there, a dull ache rather than the sharp stab it had been, but manageable now. Progress, not perfection. I made coffee in the small kitchen of my new place, the morning sunlight streaming through windows that faced east instead of west like at the old apartment. Different view, different life. The furniture was a mishmash of pieces, some from storage, some borrowed from friends, a few hastily purchased items. Nothing matched, nothing felt quite like home yet, but it was mine. A space untainted by betrayal or shared memories. The jeweler had been surprisingly understanding when I returned the ring. Happens more than you'd think, he'd said sympathetically, offering a refund minus a small restocking fee. Better to find out now than after the wedding. Better to find out now. Those words had been echoing in my head for days. Was it really better? Would it have been worse to marry her, build a life together, maybe have children, only to discover years later that she was capable of such callous betrayal? Or would she have grown out of it, become the person I thought she was all along? Questions without answers. Scenarios I'd never know the outcome of. Alternative lives that now existed only in my imagination. My phone chimed with a text message. I expected it to be Mike or Carlos checking in, but instead saw an unfamiliar number. It was nice meeting you last night. This is Emma from the balcony. Carlos gave me your number, hope that's okay. I found myself smiling as I typed back. It's okay, nice meeting you too. Would you want to grab coffee sometime? Just as friends, no pressure. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Was I ready for this? Not for dating, definitely not that, but for friendship. For normal human interaction that wasn't colored by pity or awkwardness. Coffee sounds good, I replied before I could overthink it. Friends. We arranged to meet at a cafe the following weekend. Nothing romantic, nothing complicated. Just two people getting to know each other over caffeinated beverages. The kind of normal, mundane interaction that had seemed impossible in the aftermath of Christmas night. As I put my phone down, I thought about Madison and Derek, about what had happened under that table and how it had shattered the life I thought I was building. I thought about my family rallying around me without question, about Mike and Carlos providing practical support when words weren't enough, And I thought about that snow on Christmas night, how it had covered everything in pristine white, hiding the mess underneath but not erasing it. The mess was still there, but less visible now, less defining. My phone buzzed again. Madison's name appeared on the screen for the first time in weeks. "I saw your sister yesterday. She mentioned you're doing well. I'm glad. I miss you." I looked at the message for a long moment, then marked it as read without responding. Perhaps someday I would find it in me to reply, to achieve some kind of closure or even forgiveness. But not today. Today was about moving forward one small step at a time. Outside my window, the winter sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. Another day, another chance. Not the life I had planned, but maybe, just maybe, a life that could be good in its own unexpected way. I put my phone away and got up to make coffee, humming a tune I didn't recognize at first. Then I realized it was the Christmas carol that had been playing in the background when I first met Madison at that coffee shop 18 months ago. But this time, the memory didn't bring pain. Just a quiet acknowledgement that some chapters end so others can begin. And for now, that was enough. Epilogue: 1 year later, the lights on my parents' Christmas tree twinkled merrily, reflecting off ornaments old and new. The house hummed with familiar holiday chaos, my mother directing traffic in the kitchen, my father pretending to care about football while secretly reading news on his phone, Amy's kids running around with new toys. "Need help with anything?" Emma asked, appearing at my side with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. I accepted one gratefully. "I think Mom has it under control." "She's in her element." Emma smiled, nudging my shoulder affectionately. "She certainly is. I think she's already tried to feed me 5 different appetizers." "Only 5? She must be slacking." We'd been dating for 8 months now, having maintained that initial just friends status for precisely 3 coffee meetings before admitting there was something more between us. Emma, with her straightforward nature and genuine smile, had been exactly what I needed. Patient when the shadows of last Christmas occasionally resurfaced, understanding when I needed space, but never treating me like I was broken. "Is it weird?" she asked quietly, following my gaze to the dining room where a new table now stood. My parents had replaced the old one in what they claimed was a long-planned renovation, but what I suspected was an attempt to erase the memory of last year's disaster. "A little," I admitted, "but less than I expected." Madison had moved to Chicago 3 months after our breakup, taking a job with a bigger PR firm. According to mutual friends, she was dating someone new, a doctor she'd met through work. I hoped it was going well for her, not because I harbored any lingering feelings, but because I'd finally reached a place where I didn't wish her ill. Derek was another story. He'd returned from Florida after his fresh start failed to materialize, trying to reintegrate into the family with apologies and promises to change. My parents had eventually allowed him at family gatherings again, though the tension remained palpable. He wasn't here today, having chosen to spend Christmas with friends instead, a decision that relieved everyone. Uncle Jason, Lily, now 8, came bounding into the room. "Can you help me set up my new tablet, the one you got me?" I smiled, remembering the innocent role she'd played in exposing last year's betrayal. "Sure thing, kiddo, let's see what we've got." As I helped Lily navigate her new device, I caught Emma chatting easily with my mother in the kitchen, laughing at something Amy had said. She fit here in a way Madison never truly had, not because she tried harder to be liked, but because she wasn't trying at all. She was simply herself. Later, as we all gathered around the new dining table for Christmas dinner, I looked at the faces of my family, the people who had supported me through the worst year of my life and were now sharing in what was shaping up to be one of the best. "Toast," my father suggested, raising his glass, "to family, to new beginnings. And to leaving the past where it belongs." "To new beginnings," everyone echoed, glasses clinking. Under the table, Emma's hand found mine, squeezing gently, not hiding, not sneaking, just connecting. Honest and open, the way things should be, I squeezed back, thinking of that snowy night a year ago when my world had fallen apart. I couldn't have imagined then that I'd be sitting at this same holiday dinner, heart intact, future bright. That the worst betrayal I'd ever experienced would eventually lead me to someone better. "You good?" Emma whispered, noticing my momentary reflection. I looked at her, really looked at her, and smiled. "Yeah," I said, "I'm good." And for the first time in a long time, I meant it completely.